Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Football Council. Tonight, we're going to talk about the international transfer of minors regime pursuant to Article 19 of the Regulation on the Status and Transfer of Players. And to that end, we are joined tonight, as usual, by Dr. Pablo Rueda, who is a specialist in football law and also the president and founder of our parent company, Derechos del Fútbol, as well as Football Council. Of course, it must be said that this is going to be the first of a number of live sessions pertaining this topic, where we're going to go into further detail the different aspects of the international transfer of minors regulations. Tonight, we're going to talk about the general prohibition, as well as the 5 exceptions that are set out in the RSTP. And to that end, we also need to know what is a minor for the purposes of our presentation and the FIFA regulations. In that regard, definition 11 of the regulations on the status and transfer of players defines minor as a player who has not yet reached the age of 18. That's fairly straightforward, very simple. This definition does not take into consideration national law or national applicable law. That is to say, maybe in a certain country, the age to come of age is 21 or maybe 16. But for the purposes of the regulation on the status and transfer of players and all FIFA regulations, the age is 18, and a player who has not yet reached that age is protected by Article 19. So Article 19 regards to the protection of minors, number 1 states, international transfer of players are only permitted if the player is over the age of 18. In other words, if we're talking about a minor, the international transfer of minors is in principle and in general terms prohibited by RSTP regulations. So the general principle is the international transfer of minors is not allowed. But of course, there are exceptions. The number 1 exception to this rule, because it has the more, I would say, the more possibilities. That's why we need to analyze each exception case by case, because there's a number of possibilities that can be in this exception, right? So the number 1 would be the player's parents move to the country in which the new club is located for reasons not linked to football. Again, there's a number of possibilities. One very straight, easy example where this exception might be authorized would be, for instance, imagine a family of a father, a mother, and a son that plays football and is a minor. So one of the parents receives some very attractive job offer to work abroad. And so they make the decision and they move to another country in order to take advantage of that job opportunity for the parents, right? After they get there and they settle in, they then set out to find a suitable football club for their son, and he wants to play in a certain club. That transfer, in principle, should be allowed. Because they move for reasons not linked to the player's footballing activities. It is the player, the son, the minor's footballing activities that need not to be linked. So maybe for example, another example would be if the father of the minor, is a football coach and gets an offer abroad, and he goes because he works as a professional coach, that exception would be also authorized in that scenario because it's not linked to the minor's football activity. So a second exception would be, in this case, the player needs to be between the ages of 16 and 18, and the transfer needs to take place within the territory of the European Union or the European Economic Area. The second scenario would be the transfer takes place between 2 associations within the same country. So in regards to the first scenario, a simple example would be, for instance, it doesn't matter the nationality of the player. He's already in the EU, the European Union, and wants to transfer from Spain to Italy, for instance, and it's between the ages of 16 and 18. That authorization should be easy to obtain in regard to this exception. And now, pursuant to In that moment, the player status committee, now is the player status chamber, and pursuant to the player status committee and CAS decisions, also this exception could be contemplated in this scenario where the player comes from a country that has a treaty with the European Union in regards to the free movement of workers. So that player should be entitled also to be authorized pursuant to this exception. That would be another scenario. And a third scenario, also pursuant to FIFA's jurisprudence and also CAS jurisprudence, would be the scenario where also an Italian minor that plays, for instance, in Panama, wants to transfer to Spain. He should be also able to be authorized to this exception because he's a citizen, a national of a European country, so he should have the same rights as any national of any European country. So he also should be protected by this exception. And the second scenario would be the most classic one would be the example of the United Kingdom. So in the United Kingdom, we have 4 associations within the same country. That would be Wales, England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. A player can move if he's between the ages of 16 and 18 within those 4 associations, and that authorization should also be awarded. Before we go further, and I apologize for this, I should say that all these exceptions need to be previously authorized by the player's status chamber of the football tribunal. All. It doesn't matter that we see it clearly. It needs to be priorly authorized in order for the international transfer certificate to be issued. So in order for the engaging club to have this minor be transferred to his team pursuant to the exception number 2, that club must follow and comply with a minimum set of obligations as follows. It shall provide the player with an adequate football education and/or training in line with the highest national standards. That national standard, among other factors to take into consideration, one would be the club category pursuant to the FIFA's qualification and where the member association put that club. That's one consideration. 2, it shall guarantee the player an academic or school or vocational education in addition to football. That is to say, it's kind of like a fallback plan. So if the player doesn't go professional, if the player for some reason ends his footballing career, he needs to have another means to earn a living. And that's the purpose of this regulation right here. So it should be the football training should be of the highest national standards, and the academic and vocational education should be also provided to the player. And also, the club shall make all necessary arrangements to ensure that the player is looked after in the best way possible. That includes, but it's not limited, for example, to the installations where the player is going to live. It can be a club's installations. It could be a family house, but it needs to be suitable for the player. And also maybe provide a mentor, a guide for the minor to help him out. That's also a requirement. And lastly, the club shall, on registration of such player, provide the relevant association with proof that it is compliant with the aforementioned obligations. That would be the obligations that the engaging club needs to comply with in order for the transfer of the minor to take place within the EU territory or associations within the same country. So exception number 3, this is the one related to the frontiers. Two different associations. Corrígeme ahí, Dani, por favor. Exception number 3 would be if the player lives no further than 50 kilometers from a national border and the club with which the player wishes to be registered in the neighboring association is also within 50 kilometers of that border. In this case, the maximum distance between the player's domicile and the club headquarters shall be 100 kilometers, no more than that. In such cases, the player must continue to live at home and the 2 associations must give their explicit consent. Furthermore, if the player afterwards decides that he wants to register himself in a club in his hometown, it should apply again for an international transfer certificate. So that's important to take into consideration. Exception number 4, this is the humanitarian reasons exception, the very important one. In this case, the player is at least temporarily permitted to reside in the country of arrival or is recognized by the competent state authorities as vulnerable and requiring state protection by the previous country of arrival after fleeing their country of origin for humanitarian reasons without their parents due to either of the following: their life or freedom being threatened on account of race, religion, nationality, belonging to a particular social group or political opinion, or 2, any other circumstances where their survival is seriously threatened. So we have to identify 2 scenarios here. The first one would be if the minor has been formally recognized as a refugee or a protected person. In this case, they may be registered with a professional club or a purely amateur club. And secondly, there are no restrictions on any subsequent national transfer of the minor prior to their turning 18. The second scenario is a bit different. If the minor has been formally recognized as asylum seeker or has been recognized by the competent state authorities as vulnerable in accordance with Article 19D of the RSTP, in this case, they may only be registered with a purely amateur club because of the status. And secondly, they may be subject of a subsequent national transfer, but are not permitted to register with a professional club until they turn 18. So very, very important distinctions. In the first scenario, the player can register for a professional team also. In the second scenario, he wouldn't be allowed to do so. And now, exception 5. In this case, this is an academic reasons for the exception. The player is a student and moves without his parents to another country temporarily for academic reasons in order to undertake an exchange program. This is very important because the duration of the player's registration for the new club until he turns 18 or until the end of the academic or school program cannot exceed 1 year, only 1 year registration. The player's new club may only be a purely amateur club without a professional team or without a legal, financial, or de facto link to a professional team. That player is going abroad to study. That's the most important aspect. That's why he cannot join a professional team. It would be a circumvention of the regulations if he does so. So also, all these principles pertaining to the protection of minors apply also for first registration of minors. In that regard, and according to Article 19, number 3 of the RSTP, the provisions of the article shall also apply to any player who has never previously been registered with a club, is not a national of the country where the association at which he wishes to be registered for the first time is domiciled, and has not lived continuously for at least the last 5 years in said country. So again, everything that's been talked about in regards to the transfer of minors applies to the first registration. It's slightly different scenarios, but the application is the same. So in conclusion, fairly easy. As a general rule, the international transfer of minors is prohibited pursuant to the regulation on the status and transfer of players. 2, there are 5 taxative exceptions to this general provision, numero clausus. 5 taxative, even though we can have different modalities of the same exception that need to be studied on a case-by-case basis. But there are only 5, and they usually need to be interpreted very strictly in order to protect any circumvention of the RSTP regulations. And lastly, the principles applicable to the international transfer of minors apply also in cases of first registration of a minor pursuant to Article 19.3 of the RSTP. So, thank you very much for your time. Please be sure to watch us in our next live session, where we're going to go into further detail in regards to the first one of the exceptions, and so on and so forward. We're going to talk a lot of details pertaining the international transfer of minors regulations and the different FIFA provisions. Thank you very much.